So let us look more closely at this really interesting picture. As I say, one of the first images of a university. And the scene is very familiar to us. We have an instructor, a lecturer. We have students sitting in rows facing the lecturer. Let's take a closer look at this. So, well, as I say, the lecturer is on a pedestal, again, is male, has a large beard, and we can see that the knowledge is also coming from a book. So books are the predominant technology. The technology of the written language is a store of knowledge in this setting. And we have a situation where we have one-to-many, the lecturer at the front transmitting knowledge to the students. If we zoom out, it's really interesting to look at our students and see perhaps some similarities to students in our own day. So as you can see, there are students who don't seem particularly interested in what is being said at the front of the room, but seem somewhat distracted. It is hard to tell exactly what their focus of attention is. There seems to be some discussion here. Perhaps, in fact, this student is sending a message. This is a messenger before we had iPhones. But you can see not everybody's attention is actually on the teacher. In the front row, though, we have the keen and enthusiastic student that we may have experienced in our own life, looking up keenly and enthusiastically at the teacher. But at the back of the room, there seems to be those who are more interested in other things. Here we seem to have the somewhat bemused student who can't actually work out what page they're on and what is being read. Over at the front of the classroom, maybe they're from the Ministry of Education or from some kind of authority, checking that the teacher sticks to the prescribed curriculum, sticks to the information that's contained in the book. But of course I am only making presumptions there. We're not really quite sure, but they seem to be different to the students sitting in rows, and I think this is indicated by their robes and hats and the length of their beards perhaps as well. And then we come to my favourite student, and again I'm sure that some of you have experienced this. I certainly have. They're somewhat disinterested. I don't know whether this is because of the content of the course, whether the pedagogy being used is not to their liking, or whether it was simply a rather overactive undergraduate party the night before that has led to this state of affairs. The setting that we see here is kind of one that is familiar to us all. Now what I want to do, having looked in detail, is see how the same image can be used to give us two different and alternative narratives. So in this first narrative, let us call it "Education is broken and we need to fix it." In this one I say, look at this picture from 600 years ago and look how nothing has changed. What other industries, what other fields of human endeavour would you find no real changes in 600 or more years? That we could take any one of these participants, and if we could time travel, drop them into many current universities, and they'd instantly recognise what was taking place. So we can use it to kind of make the argument that education really ought to change. It really ought to reflect the use of some technologies that we currently use, some better understanding of pedagogy and how people learn, and make the case that really some radical changes need to happen to education. An alternative narrative would be that, look at this picture. It's 600 years old, and it shows really how robust our methods of learning are. That despite all the changes that have occurred with society and technology, we are still human beings. Our brains do not evolve at a rate that requires us to make drastic changes to education. The fact that our own students are so similar to the ones depicted here shows that this method of lecture, of reading information from books, is as sound as ever. And although we may use new technologies like e-readers and have repositories online rather than physical libraries, actually ultimately learning is a human activity done best face-to-face, and that is why it has prevailed and sustained itself over those centuries, and that we need to have this face-to-face interaction for good education to take place. Now, I'm not proposing that either of those is necessarily true and correct, or indeed maybe there's some truth in both of them. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when we listen to people making predictions about the future of education, it is possible to spin different narratives off of the very same resource, and in this case, a painting, and then to create and use that to create evidence, or so-called evidence, of the changes that we think should take place.